So what we're going to talk about today is how to tell if something that you find is good science. Now, it's never going to be perfect, but you're going to come across a lot of stuff on the internet and other places, and it's nice to be able to evaluate it, give it a good look-see, and say, hey, I think this is good science, or hey, I'm not sure I should trust this source. So, how do we know? But is it good science? There's a couple of things that you're going to do with everything that you evaluate. For example, one of those things is going to be to look at a number of different things. Like, for example, where is it published? Now, if the thing that you're looking for is published in a scientific journal, especially a peer-reviewed scientific journal, meaning other scientists have looked at the article before it was published, it's probably pretty good science. But even then, some things have gotten through where people have just lied and other people have said, well, that sounds great, and then they've gone back and learned otherwise. So that is a great thing, but it's not always perfect. An educational institution is another place that might publish something. .edu websites typically mean that it's a university or a college. Professors are often held to higher standards, so they typically are good places to find science. Government agencies. Now, you wouldn't normally think that that's the first place you would go to for science, but there are a lot of places that are scientific labs run by the government. Therefore, if you find .gov sites, oftentimes their research is at least held to, again, a higher standard, and it often has to be published and double-checked by people. So it's typically a spot for good science. A news site. So now the news isn't specifically trying to understand how science works and doesn't typically do scientific studies themselves. They usually report on other people's studies. So if I see something as a news site, the first thing I'm going to do is decide if it's a somewhat trustworthy news site, but then I'm going to go reading the article more carefully and determine if these other places, scientific research or educational institutions or labs, are involved. Another place you might find information is a nonprofit. If you're on the internet, that would be places that are .orgs. Some nonprofits are great because their whole goal is to go out there and find scientific information and put it out to the public. But that's not every nonprofit's goal, and some of them are biased in one way or another. So you need to know who you're talking to and what their goal is and who's behind it before making a decision. All right, so once we figure out the basics of that, now we can say who wrote it. So what are we looking for here with good science? Well, most of the time, science is done by scientists. So you should have somebody who has a high-level degree, a master's or a doctoral degree in a scientific field. They are doing the research themselves, preferably, or at least they work in that field and they can comment on it. So you have somebody who is a scientist who has done scientific work. That's probably the best possible version. Educators, especially those in the scientific field, also tend to report about science from a place of knowledge because they have coursework and background in science, so they can often do a good job of evaluating it, which is another reason why I like .edu sites. Journalists may or may not have a scientific background. Some of them do, and they can write very effectively about science for the general public. Some are just listening to what they're being told, and they're not really sure how to parse it or if they're getting the right information. So if you see, again, something that is a news source or a journalist is writing it, you want to read it and see if it makes sense and if they're in the right places. These are your main people that would find something. Obviously, anybody can write something on the internet, so if you can't find the background and credentials of the person who wrote it, then you might want to be a little bit more concerned that they don't have an appropriate background or credentials, and that's why they're hiding it. Finally, I like to look for how the research has actually been done. If they're saying that a study was done, what kind of study? Was it a research study that was done by scientists? Was it done in a lab? Was it done out with the public? Was it an analysis of other existing data? Was it a survey? If it was a survey, who did the survey? How many people were involved? How did they collect them? I really want to get a sense of what kind of data exists. So are there numbers? Has somebody done statistical analysis on them? These are definitely the things I look for to understand how the science was done in the article and then use that as part of my evaluation. Then I have to make a decision. Is the research sound? Does it sound like there were scientists doing scientific research, that they used appropriate methodology, that they had enough subjects, things like that? Is there bias? I mean, the answer is yes, because there's always bias. But the question is have the people involved looked at that? Did they try to account for something with a control group? Did they compare one thing to another? Or does the article itself note that this is one way, but there might be these other possibilities? That's not always true, but it's worth seeing how they do it. And then, of course, does it make sense? I, in this case, use my scientific background to say, does the science as I know it also make sense with this? And as you learn more science, that's what you'll be able to do as well. Sometimes you read something and you go, that just doesn't pass what I call the sniff test, which is it doesn't sound like it makes sense or like it works. Now, if you don't have anything specific to back you up, that's when you could send that to an actual scientist and decide. But a lot of times, at least trust your gut on the, I need to do more research here, because it would be helpful. All right, so those are the basics. How about we go ahead and give it a try? So here is an article that I found on CNN Health. Now, CNN is a pretty stock standard news source. It's a fairly middle ground news source if you go searching for it, and it's got things from all over the place. And this particular article says, eating a low-carb diet based on meat with a question mark, you may gain weight later on, study finds. So clearly it's based on some kind of study. Now, I said we want to, first of all, evaluate where it is. This is a news source. So on its own, I can't trust it completely, so I have to go looking for the different details and the pieces of the article. This is most of what you find on the internet, is stuff you're not sure about. It was written by somebody who I can't click on. It's probably simply a member of their staff, so I'm going to assume that this person is a journalist and not necessarily a scientist. She probably has byline information down at the bottom. Not necessarily. So I don't know who wrote it, so I have to rely on the information in the article. All right. So let's see what I can find here. So as I look to the article, I'm going to say, how do they bring up the science? Do they make it sound like they're trying to convince you of something, or is there some play in what they're doing? So it says, if you want your low-carb diet to help you lose weight and keep it off, consider the quality of the food you eat. According to new research that compared 5 types of low-carb diets. There's a lot of types of low-carb diets. As somebody who eats a somewhat low-carb diet, I'm a little surprised they found that many. It does sound like they're trying to catch your attention, but that is pretty common for a news source, so I'm going to keep going and see what I can find. So the next thing I see that I think is useful is a quote. When people consume diets that emphasize carbohydrates from whole grains, healthy stuff, they have a better chance of keeping excess weight at bay, said the study's senior author, Dr. Ki Sun, Associate Professor of Nutrition and Epidemiology at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health in Boston. So this person is an Associate Professor of Nutrition and Epidemiology and the study's senior author, which means it's likely he is a scientist. So this person, I probably would, if I was doing something complicated, continue to look up their credentials, but is probably somewhat trustworthy. Then it says the study compared an overall low-carbohydrate diet to one that has primarily used animal protein and fat. So I'm not sure what they mean by overall versus primary, but I'll get into that. And they talk about all the different things they looked at. Then another scientist says, to my knowledge, examining the effects on lasting weight loss of different low-carb variants is novel. So he's saying this is new. Now, this person is not the scientist who did the work. He's a specialist in preventive and lifestyle medicine who founded a nonprofit. He was not involved in the research, and they note that, so that's useful. So then it tells a little more about what the diets did. Then it says those who adopted unhealthy low-carb diets gained weight. Those who adopted healthy low-carb diets lost weight. Now, I'm still not sure what they mean by that, but they are clearly trying to make a note of this unhealthy, healthy. They are still using quotes from the authors of the paper, so that's good. Now they're going to talk to me a little bit about the study, and it says that it was published in the journal JAMA Open Network Open, and this is a good peer-reviewed journal, so I can say that that's worthwhile. And it is on people who participated in 3 established longitudinal studies. So these are all things that went on for a long time, over a long period of time. Now they tell you a little more about the studies. They say they're observational, not designed to establish cause and effect, and they reveal associations, and that's important. Most of these are survey-based, as in people went and they answered questions about the food they ate. And then they tell you about the participants, and this is good because this means there's a lot of data involved, and it says that low-carb diets that emphasized certain things were better than other ones. They give you a bottom line, which is that simply adopting a low-carb diet was not associated with lasting weight loss, although I'm going to tell you most diets are not associated with lasting weight loss, but that is another entire story. However, if I'm going to try to figure this article out, I'm going to say that it focuses on a study published in a peer-reviewed journal, and it talks to scientists who did the work. So I don't think that this article itself is particularly problematic. I'm still not sure about every detail that the article is talking about in the study, and they don't explain the data overly well. So if I really wanted to say, do I believe every word, I would have to go looking at the study. Now, if they're good, they give me a link to it, and they do. So here I would be able to go, read this, and take a look. And in fact, you are going to do an assignment later this semester where you are going to read an article and then read this article and tell me how they compare. But the fact that I could link to it is good enough for right now. So how would I evaluate this CNN article? I'd say, honestly, it's probably pretty good science. Is the statement about the diets accurate? I won't know for sure until I read the study, but I believe the study was probably done well and under good pretenses by good people. And that is how you generally evaluate something that you find on the internet.